There's a lot of talk in education about the importance of STEM skills for our students. Today, I talk with Chanel Johnson, a science coach and educator from Atlanta, Georgia, who walks us through why it's important to remember the fundamentals of science before we step into STEM, and a little bit about her inspiration along the way.
Welcome to Focus on K-12, EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. So let's dive in as we focus on K-12.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chanel Johnson, and I am a STEM specialist and technology coach based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Furthermore, I am a wife and I am a mother of 3 beautiful kids, and I am so happy to be here today.
Well, thanks for joining us. I know you and I have talked about science and STEM before, right? So I think what we want to kick it off with today is you talked a little bit about not just STEM, but going back to the basics of science before we talk about STEM. So tell me a little bit about what you mean.
Of course. So during some research, I had to ask myself, what is STEM? You know, we know the basics, science, technology, engineering, math. We know those acronyms, but what is it exactly? And you can look so many different places and you're going to get 1,000 different answers. But something that NSTA said that really stuck with me is about moving forward, solving problems, learning, and pushing innovation to the next steps, right? So it's open for interpretation, but this is kind of the definition they're sticking with. That whatever you're doing, make sure that you're moving forward, solving problems, learning, pushing to the next level. So with that being said, being open to interpretation, it can go anywhere. Don't forget about science. You know, science is not that content where we're just sitting there. We're having information fed to us. We're memorizing things. That's not what that is. So making sure that we're understanding that 3-dimensional approach to science and how just those very skills, taking that content, those cross-cutting concepts and those practices, that is your foundation to STEM. Whether you're doing computer science, whether you're coding a drone to do whatever you want to do, or whether it's microtechnology, those still fall back to the foundations of what science education is.
Right. So I think one of the things that people struggle with, especially science at the younger ages, right, is getting engagement, getting kids involved. So how do we take these foundational ideas that you're talking about and then make it so that the science sticks, right? How do we get that that next level with our science instruction?
That's a great question. And I think, interestingly, the younger you are a scientist, right? Think of just our own kids. We talked about, having kids. They're asking questions. They're asking 1,000 questions. But what do we do sometimes as parents? Stop asking all these questions. I don't know. We're telling them, don't ask all of these questions. But the very practice of science is to ask a question. Or looking at just making observations. Our students going outside. Hey, I noticed, it's interesting that my daughter actually has piano practice at 6. Last week she said, it's dark already? What is she doing right now? She is making an observation. She may not notice daylight savings time. She may not know that the earth had a tilt, and it didn't take all of that, but she noticed a change. And from that, is that what we call a phenomenon? She's able to notice something change, and now that phenomenon, let's get into the science. Well, why is it dark now? When 2-3 weeks ago, it wasn't. It was bright. It was still hot out, right? We're in Atlanta. We're in Georgia. It's hot. So keeping the curiosity alive in our children, and I don't know what happens because as they get older, the curiosity dies. The questions, we don't ask them anymore. Science is the place to play, and we're changing that culture, and we need to go back to that.
Yeah, so I think you talked about being a parent and how important it is to try to dive into those questions, and we may not have all the answers, right? I think one of the things you talked about was that you got involved in maybe not formally science and STEM at a young age, right? But that because you had someone there who is guiding you through some of those questions, that really helped you grow and learn to appreciate more about that. So tell me a little bit about what that experience was like.
Absolutely. So I am the hashtag early this year was girl dad, because of Kobe and his daughter. I am, my dad is a girl dad. I'm the oldest daughter of two, and he would always instill, even when I wasn't listening. And that's the funny part. I wasn't listening. Back then, science wasn't cool. Please, no, goodness. But he was always teaching me things in his own way, teaching me to look at the world from a different lens, teaching me to notice, ask your questions. What do you see? And sometimes he would just, hey, check this out. Why do you think that happened? So I didn't realize then that he was building the scientist in me, because the same practices that he was doing for me at home, I see myself, one, doing it with my own children. We can't go for a walk without some type of conversation, right, in STEM. And even with my own students and teachers that I support, it is still those same facilitation of questions, that I'm not a lecturer, I'm a facilitator. And one thing that you mentioned about, as parents, sometimes we don't have the answers. I think that's what makes science so intimidating. When in your mind you think of a scientist, you think of someone super duper smart. You think of Albert Einstein, you think of, I don't know, Doc Brown from Back to the Future, and they're always saying things that, you don't understand. The flux capacitor, what is that? So one thing, we have to change the lens of what we think of when we see a scientist, that it's not just Doc Brown. It very well could be Chanel Johnson, right? And we also have to recognize that you don't have to know the answers in science. Science isn't about the one right answer. It's about the process of getting to an answer, or to an, actually not an answer, to an explanation of why the world works the way it does.
Yeah, I love that you said, a scientist doesn't have to look like Doc Brown, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that this is what a scientist looks like. This is what a scientist doesn't look like. And a lot of students feel like, well, I'm over here in this box that says this is what a scientist doesn't look like. So what are some ways that you see either facilitating that change or talking through, like, this is what a scientist looks like at the school level?
That's a great question. One, exposure. So it's really important, even on the school level, when you're hiring for scientists, or for a science teacher, that you're intentional, that you're intentional about having a diverse set of teachers. And don't put your minority teacher in the lowest, in the biology class or the freshman class. Put them in the advanced, the AP classes as well, because most likely those are the students who are wanting to take science that next level. So they too need to see in the advanced classes, there's a representation of scientists there. And then you have to bring science to the student, not forcing the student to the science. So what that means, cultural relevance, when we talk about a phenomena, find a phenomena that is in their world. Science has to be something they can touch, they can see in their world. Because if they can't connect to it, they can't see how it relates to their world and the problems they need to solve in their community. So one, make sure representation is there. Two, bring the scientists to, bring the student to the science, or bring science to the make sure that the science is relevant to the student, what's in their world. And of course, understand you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the sage on the stage. You don't have to be the know-it-all in science as the educator. Let the students do it.
We've talked a lot about the passion and the curiosity and the wonder and laying the foundation there. But, a lot of things that we get to that point where we do have to teach the content, right? So what are some of the resources or the tools that you feel like are most beneficial, right, when you're teaching science in the classroom today?
Absolutely. I'll just say that science is expensive. If you let it can get expensive, and there goes another issue, even in equity. If you're in a school where the focus is, hey, the students need to learn how to read, the students need to know how to do the math. Well, guess what? They can do that in science. So sometimes the shift of focus moves from science. So when I say expensive with time and expensive with funds. So you have to be creative in how you're sure science instruction is getting its equal time. Science has to reclaim its time as well. But one of the things, and I came from that reality where the science budget was a little low. So I used to do what was called science on the budget. If I didn't have it, I dare not ask for it. So I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to get it, which led me to virtual lab. The difference in, this is where it's going to get a little debatable, where there are some teachers who prefer the wet labs, the hands-on, you actually physically doing. Back then, for me, I preferred virtual labs because I took out the situation of them doing it right or wrong, the wasting of resources, the having to start over and prep. With the virtual labs, there's an expectation, there's a restart button. You make a mistake, restart. And there's focus on the data analysis, the making connections versus making sure I'm doing the lab right. So things like that simulation is helpful. Gizmos, I use those. And then we have a lot of students that are gamers now, where they can take that information and they can apply it into a game. So Legends of Learning is another one where just now I was playing with a game with Legends of Learning about survival. I had to make sure that the animal in the jungle didn't die by making sure he had the appropriate food. I'm sitting here feeding him grass and he's a carnivore, right? So guess what's happening? He's not going to live. But I had to figure it out in that moment of time. Oh God, he needs meat. He needs something else that's not competitive with him. So he needs like a rabbit. So that in itself was a learning experience, and you have students that learn that way. And then of course, I'm a talker. So students who are social learners, you have Flipgrid. You can take those same science concepts, constructing an argument, constructing explanations, and you're doing that through a Flipgrid, having conversations with students. So there's so many tools, but those are typically my go-to.
Wow, that's a lot of tools. It seems like there's a lot out there and it's constantly changing, especially when we think about these virtual tools, right? Because I know, the PhET labs, which we used 10 years ago in my science class, it's come a long way and they've added so much more content. So how do you stay on top of all the changes that are going on with the different resources and the different things that you're using in the classroom?
Twitter. It's so funny. Twitter is how I stay on top of it. The tools, every tool that I use, first I check, do you have a Twitter account? And if you do, make sure I follow you. Make sure I'm tagging you and I'm showing you, hey, I'm using your resources here. And oftentimes these tools follow back. They show you their updates. They keep you on top of it. They're very responsive now. So now these companies are responding to the consumers. So I appreciate that, and that's how I stay on top of it. And of course, different PDs out there. I mean, Twitter, you can get lost in Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through this with us, to share your passion, to share your work. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. If you have an idea for a future guest or just want to talk about the show, either post something in the comments below or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.